Hi, my name's Paul Arnold and I'm a qualified counselling psychotherapist. But before that I spent 27 years in the advertising world. But now I specialise in relationships. I specialise in relationships on the individual and relationships with teams and groups. And I want to share with you some learnings that inform the work I do in helping to build high-performing agency-client relationships. And I'm going to be bringing learnings from personal relationships, from what I've seen in the therapy room. And I'm going to demonstrate how those learnings apply in agency-client relationships. I want to talk about communication. And for me, communication is the number one factor that defines the success of a relationship. We must have transparency and honesty and the ability to share what needs to be said without fear of reprisal, being discredited, humiliated, rejected. Because when lack of truth and lack of transparency enters a relationship, it strangles the life force out of that relationship. And therefore I think not only have we got to have the ability to have the courage to come and say what we need to say, which takes a lot of courage, but also we need to learn how to listen better. And most people don't listen. You know, I'll give you one thing. We need to listen with our eyes and with our heart and not just with our ears. And we need to not listen through our current set of biases, but how do we listen in a very open space? A Danish friend of mine, he has what he calls kitchen floor conversations with his wife. Fantastic idea. And basically, any of them can call a kitchen floor conversation. And it goes like that. They go in the kitchen, they sit on the floor. Why? Because it's a metaphorical representation. We're now at base level. We're not hiding behind anything. We're at base level. We're sitting on the kitchen floor. And now is the opportunity for that person to say what they want to say without being challenged or criticized. The other person just has to listen and then repeat back what they heard. Now, a little bit later on, the other person can then come back and say, now I want to say my piece. But actually, it's a really powerful concept about that stuff. And I think, you know, what often happens, you know, I often see it, you know, when those sort of agency client reviews come along, you know, I'm looking at both sides and I'm sort of like, there's the sort of client who's like, shall we put it quite, having a go at the agency. And the agency are like, quite nice, they're quite polite, you know, they're still saying what they say, but they're saying it very polite because of the power imbalance. And I think actually agencies need to be much more courageous to know that they should be able to say what they want to say and it's going to be okay. I think at the end of the day, I always say, what do you want to do? Do you want to be liked or do you want to be respected? And if you really want to be respected, you've got to say the truth. And maybe you've got to say to them, there's some hard stuff I really want to say. Are you okay to hear this stuff? So actually, I do think it does take both sides. It takes the client side to give permission for that stuff to be fully heard, but also for the agency to have the courage to go and say it. Now, I often run workshops where I am that person who gets that stuff out. You know, and that's a very powerful. And I often do the exercise that what else hasn't been said and to getting the elephant out of the room. And that is really fascinating because then you get out and said, yep, now what are we going to do with this? Now it's in the open. We haven't identified who said it, but it's a real powerful space to say that stuff. Another thing, I'm not a fan of annual reviews. It's too late. Do it now. Do it immediately after the meeting. Why? Because one, is small at that point. B, everyone knows what happens. So you've got real evidence to start to build on that stuff. You know, and I often say, like, is this a good time for me to offer some feedback? You know, maybe they're not in a good point. Maybe they're going to rush out, but you've opened the door to do that stuff. And the critical thing about it is it's positive as well as negative. You know, let's not make communication all about the negative stuff. Why can't we give that stuff? And as long as it's given from a place of real authenticity and not fake praise with some ulterior motive. You know, as my grandmother used to say, a thank you cost you nothing. So maybe we ought to be thinking about, how do we help lift up other people? How do we make them feel they've done a good job when they have done a good job? You know, I may be naive in this thing, but I think the world goes around better when we're nice to people than when we're pulling each other apart.